Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Mark's Inspiration. Got the sidebar series here. I'm reading Coming Back Home, The True Adventure of Mark Daniels. And we are on chapter 2. But before we begin, smash that like button. Do it now, and subscribe if you haven't already. Okay? Smash that like button. Now, reach up there. It's really easy. Okay. Let's go. Chapter 2, Coming Back Home. Let me feel. Were you told not to feel when you was a kid? I was always told you shouldn't feel that way. Probably what they meant is they didn't want me to be upset or to be hurt. But I took it as you shouldn't feel. So let's go. Let's see what we have to say here about that. Fear wasn't allowed in our home. Not that there was a list of rules on the wall that said as much, or that my dad told us. You're not allowed to be afraid. Of course, that never happened. He never said more than a few words about anything, much less emotions. And we only learned the rules when we were punished for breaking them. But he made sure we knew. Fear was what weak people felt, and weak people were the worst kind of people. A look of disgust at me or my brother for a moment of hesitation. A sharp rebuke if I quit something because it hurt. A tirade at someone on the television or the radio because they were soft. He had 101 ways to let us know, and we knew. He took us for a drive one day. He had gotten a new old truck with an engine to match his bravado. My dad never did anything with us boys unless it was to teach or toughen us, so I dreaded the drive from the moment he mentioned it. Get in the truck, boy. Don't make me wait. He stared down at me while I stood trembling next to the open truck door. There was that look, disgust, that he had sired this weak disappointment of a son. And I felt like that sometimes too. I don't remember climbing in or leaving the driveway, or even coming to the long stretch of straight road, a mile or so from our house. I only remember flying down that long hill and seeing the needle on the speedometer pass the 100 mark. I remember it feeling like the wheels on the truck were not even touching the asphalt, and that any subtle change in steering would send us out of control to our deaths. I still remember that ride. My dad was enjoying it. My brother and I were scared to death. But what we were going to say, Dad, slow down? Yeah, that's what I was thinking, but I knew better, and he was probably a little lit up from a few beers, so it was pretty scary. A lot of people call that crap trauma. That's not trauma to me. Trauma is like if we had an accident and he got killed and I had to watch him die, all right? So I'm not up for the trauma and all this bull crap. Sure, I got to deal with that. And these are things that each of us have to deal with from our childhood, if it still bothers us, but it's all a perception. I can perceive my childhood as something terrible, or I can see this situation here as something that made me stronger, that made me grow, that made me what I am today, and made me able to do what I am doing today, which I like to do, which is to inspire you, to enlighten you, and to build you up. So it took everything it took to get me here. Now that's just one way of looking at it. It's your choice. You can look at it however you want to. As a victim of your childhood, of your alcoholic father, or as a victor, someone who learned from this and it took everything it took to give you the life you had today. And if you don't like the life you have today, it's not anyone's fault but your own. If you are an adult, you can make a difference in your life. No one else can. But if you continue to see yourself as a victim, guess what? You can do nothing about it. I must have started crying or screaming or something because he slowed down. That might have scared me more than the speed. He didn't say anything he didn't need to. I could feel the anger and disappointment radiating off of him. It was only a few miles back to the house, but I thought it would never end. He didn't even look at me when we got home. Didn't say a word. I overheard what he said to my mom as we walked through the door. You were right, it was one of the few times I can remember them agreeing on anything. I was a disappointment, and they both knew it. That was also one of the few memories of my mom from that time. Most everything else are just blurry images of her coming or leaving. She might have been a ghost, from what I can remember, as early as I can think back until I started school. One of my only other memories of her from that time was when Kennedy was shot. I was only 3 when the news spread across the country. I remember standing in front of the TV and even at the young age, knowing that something terrible had happened. I could see it on the reporters' faces and in the hysterical crowds of people as the camera panned the scenes of mourning and shock around the country. But what sticks out in my mind more than anything was the complete lack of emotion from my mom. She just sat there on the couch staring at the screen, as though nothing was on it. No different than if we had been watching the $100,000 pyramid. I thought that was a $10,000 pyramid. I could have been mistaken there. I'll have to look that up after the video to see. Even when my mother was there, she wasn't really there. In conversations with her as I got older, she told me that she was just working all the time back then. But I don't remember that. I just remember her being gone, or at least not present. When I started school at 5, her shifts changed at the local garment factory and she was home with us more. That really didn't change anything. It might have been worse. She was there, I could see her, but she was so empty and cold. She and my father only seemed to ever speak with each other when they were fighting, and they only ever spoke to us boys when we were in trouble. He was a ball of rage, and she was a block of ice. Later on, when I quit drinking when I was about 30, I may mention it here later, I was a ball of rage. When I was drinking, I never felt angry, but when I quit drinking, I had a lot of rage I had to deal with. I suppose I used the alcohol and drugs to suppress it. Okay, between the two, I learned that the only emotions worth showing anyone were the worst kind. I used to do things for my mom, hoping to get her approval or at least her attention. I would clean the house without being asked. I would make her things out of random bits and pieces of nothing I found in drawers or elsewhere. I would draw her pictures or bring her flowers from the yard, but she never saw them, never saw any of it, not the way I wanted her to. She would say thank you, but even at that age, I could hear that she didn't mean it. Her tone and every inflection in her voice or face spoke another message. She didn't care. Then she would do what she always did. She would find some fault. There was still dust on the windowsills. The flowers were wilted. The heart I had drawn wasn't symmetrical. It was almost like a reflex, like she couldn't just accept something as it was. And I ended up being the same way later on. I found myself always seeing the defect. It's amazing how the things we didn't like about our parents, we end up picking those up ourselves. But when we recognize them later in our life, we have the power to change that. So we can use the examples our parents set of what we thought was good and what we thought was bad. We can keep what was good, discard the rest, and change the bad that we have picked up or what we perceive as bad. And remember, they did the best they could. It had to be broken in some way. Maybe that's the only way she could relate to the world. Maybe that's the way she viewed herself, broken. As a young child, I felt like I was one of the things I brought her, flawed, overlooked, unseen. Now that might have not been the way it was, but that's the way I perceived it. I do remember her bragging to other people about how good I could draw and some of the things I did. I think they got edited out. Anytime I spoke to my mother, it would take 2 or 3 times before she would even recognize that I was speaking to her. I had this lasting image of her staring out the window, blank and distant. When she finally turned my way, she wouldn't answer whatever question or respond to whatever comment I had made. She would just shoo me off. I felt like my mother never saw me, except to find fault. I remember running away one time at the state fair. They found me and scolded me and beat me, and it was the best I had felt in a long while. At least I was valuable enough for them to look for me. I had been sure they would have left me. There were never any kisses or hugs, no I love yous, nor did this exist at any of our family gatherings. I never saw my parents express empathy or compassion with anyone. Excuse me. It was clear to me my mother didn't love me and my father outright hated me. Now, I was wrong about that. In later years, I realized they loved me the best they could, which was much better than what they were shown. But at the time, this is how I felt. This is how I perceived my parents and my family life. The perception was wrong, but this may have happened to you. Just because things felt that way or seemed that way doesn't mean that's the way they were. Perception is warped, and mine was. But it formed me, and once again, it made me who I am today. It brought me to where I am today. So I'm actually grateful for all of it. I wish I could say I was able to turn to my teachers for the love and attention I never got from my parents, but they were no less human, dealing with their own sets of pressures and difficulties. They provided a few challenges for me, as well as for all of us kids back then. I think my first real memory of school was shortly after the Cuban Missile Crisis. The teachers guided us through the classic duck and cover drills in case of a nuclear attack, the ones that every generation now makes fun of. Rightly so, they didn't instill much confidence. All we knew as kids was that any day the bomb was going to drop. I grew up with that fear. It was a devastating fear. I was 6 years old when we did that, but even when I was 21 and I started boxing, that was in the 80s, I still believed, what's the point? They're going to blow the world up anyway. Well, here I am. And I always heard those end of the world things from some religious sects. And I believe that somewhat too. But here I am, 61 years old. Guess what? The world's still here. I believe the end of times is when each of us pass on to the other side. Because that definitely will be the end of time, at least here in this realm on this planet. They even showed us a film of this ominous man sitting at a desk with big, thick glasses. He was a communist, of course, reading a paper saying that the Russians were going to take over the United States without ever firing a shot. I still remember that guy on the projector screen up there. We were first graders. Another film they showed us in the first grade taught us that if you smoke even one joint of weed, you will end up a heroin addict. Reefer Madness, I think that was. Some of you may know that, you older folks. Okay. And a crazed maniac. Ooh, just from one joint. Now marijuana's legal. Can you believe it? And now weed is legal in many states, as I said. So what I learned from first grade was Russians and weed smokers are monsters. They were barely human, if they were at all, and we should hate them, and one or the other was going to kill me. You can imagine how difficult it would have been to care about school when the world would soon be in a nuclear holocaust, survived only by the Russians and villainous weed smokers. Can you imagine? A 5-6-year-old kid, this is what I'll call it propaganda. Propaganda was what it was. They wanted us to hate the Russians. Guess what? I've been to the Ukraine. I've met a lot of Russians. They're just like us. But when I was a kid, they wanted you to believe that communists were monsters. Not that I believe in communists, the idea of that, but they're people just like us. But they wanted us to hate them. And they wanted us to believe that marijuana, you smoke marijuana one day, you'll be smoking heroin, you'll be doing heroin, and you'd be crazy. That's not true either. I smoked weed. I never did heroin. Okay, so there you go. Don't believe everything you hear in the news or everything the government tells you. Okay, they have their own agenda, and it's usually not yours, and it's usually not for your own good, even though they may say it is. Just my opinion. What I've learned from 61 years of life. It's amazing how programmable a young mind is. We believe in our parents, our government, our teachers, and a slew of other authorities. We think they're supposed to know the answers, but they don't. They just pass on a new version of the same filtered information they were given when they were young. The same limiting beliefs, fears, and prejudices. Since my childhood, I have been to the Ukraine, as I said earlier, and I have met many Russians. Lo and behold, they are people just like me. Incredible. Can you believe it? I've also smoked a considerable amount of weed and can safely say I'm both human and not a monster. At least I like to think that. As I sit here now, so many years later, I have the benefit of having known my parents as adults and being one myself and a parent. They changed considerably as I grew, and so did I. I eventually came to truly appreciate them and understand why they were the way they were. I know now that they loved me and showed it in the best way they knew how. But like me, they were working with the programming their parents gave them as children. My mother's dad died of alcoholism when he was 42, and besides giving them life, that might have been the best thing he ever did for his children. My father was raised in an orphanage, then raised by his uncle. His father had left him and his 4 siblings when their mother died. Shortly after his birth, I never got to meet my paternal grandfather and only ever heard little about him. He was a drunk and only contacted my father when he was in jail or needed something. When he died, the state of Illinois contacted my father to pay for his funeral. I was there when the call came. Let him rot in a field somewhere, my dad said. He never did anything for me. Why should I do this for him now? The truth is, my parents loved me much better than their parents had loved them. That was a hard truth for me to believe. Some of the most important ones are. But once I had accepted it, many of my childhood memories began to take on a different color. I felt more acceptance, more love. It seems to me now that in the deepest parts of us, the places where our oldest wounds are, that's what we're really seeking, love and acceptance. The love and acceptance that we believe we never had. We seek it in the strangest places: money, sex, power, control, fame. That's not in the book, should have been. Everywhere outside of ourselves. But that isn't love, but that isn't where love is. Love lives within. It's one of those strange things that you really can't receive until you already have it. And when you have it, you will always receive it. People are often like mirrors in that way. They only show you what you show them first. But I didn't know that back then. That came later, much later. As a child, I had to find love and acceptance wherever I could find it. Between the ages of 5 and 10, I would adopt things, lots of things: snakes, birds, lizards, even bugs. I was attracted to things that were hurt, things that I could help heal. I would take them in and feed them and water them until they were better. I had to hide most of this from my parents, of course. My dad would have seen it as weakness, and my mom would have just seen it as clutter. So I kept them all in my room under my bed. Back then, I felt closer to a pet beetle than I ever did my parents. I would talk to them while I fed them, or splinted their broken arm or wing. I spoke to them just like I would anybody else. No, not just anybody, like friends. I had a way with them too. They liked me. They would crawl or hop up onto my hand when I reached down into the box or cage. I saw them as unique. I valued them for who they were, and in return, they gave me their trust. But this led to the first real tragedy of my young life, as I would find out the biggest pain comes when you've given the most from your heart. And that's the end of chapter 2. Many of you probably had pets. Pets can be our best friends because they give us love and they don't ask much in return. It's good to have a pet. If you're a single man, or maybe you're a divorced man, you might want to get a pet instead of trying to get another lover, another wife, another girlfriend, because you can develop a relationship with a pet much easier than you can with a person. And also, if you've had problems in your past relationships, unless you change yourself, then this next relationship will end up probably the same. It will be a different person, a different face, but it will be the same situation. Until you change the within, the outside continues to reflect back to you what you need to change. It's all a message to you, not to anyone else, and it's for your good. It's for your benefit. Things don't happen to you, they happen for you. We have to look for the silver lining in the dark cloud. It's always there. It's just so much easier to see the dark cloud, the negative. And of course, in our world today, as the news, media splashes out or pours out, floods out the negativity on us, It's easy for us to think there's nothing but negativity in the world, that this world is a terrible place. But there are many, many things that happen every day of the power of love, the power of people helping other people. It just doesn't make headline news, but it's there. You have to look for it. Many acts of love, many. Okay, so that's all I have time for today. Thanks for joining me, and we will start on chapter 3 in the next edition of The Power Is, no, that's the other book. Coming Back Home, The True Adventure of Mark Daniels. Remember to like and subscribe if you'd like to get my help personally. marksinspiration.com. Take care.